Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Poetry Series. We're delighted this evening to have as our featured reader, Jim Daniels. He originated in Southern Michigan, and even though he migrated from the state, he has kept Southeast Michigan and particularly Detroit in his imagination and in his 25 books of poetry and fiction. I first ran into Jim and his work back in the early 1980s. I was reviewing books for the Detroit News, and Jim won the Brittingham Poetry Contest from the University of Wisconsin Press for a title called "Places Everyone." And wait a minute, I can't talk now. Excuse me, I was interrupted. It happens. He actually is the first person to win that prize. He won the inaugural prize, and it has since been a very prominent national prize. And it attracted the attention of my book editor, and I was delighted to review this book. I would say that one of Jim's major themes has been the human wreckage of the American blue-collar working class, and he's got a variety of themes, but that is what was prominent in his earlier work, and it comes out in various ways. He went to, as we heard earlier, Alma College for his bachelor's degree, and Bowling Green University for his master's. Places Everyone was a first book. Another called Punching Out was published in 1990. A third book, which I enjoyed a lot, and I'm only skimming the surface here of his entire work, was M80, named after an explosive, a popular firecracker used at that time. He took a turn into writing fiction in the mid-1990s with a screenplay called No Pets, and he has published short stories since then. I have his book now showing, and as the workforce was decimated by offshoring and outsourcing, he focused on that and using concrete human situations, explored that, some from his personal experience, from people he knew close at hand, and from his observations. I'd like to just mention, just quote a brief passage to give you an idea of his style, which often is reportorial. That is, he doesn't editorialize, but he reports and he lets the stories speak for themselves. This is entitled No Job. He drinks Mad Dog. He smokes homegrown. He sits naked with the want ads. He barks up the wrong tree. He pulls out all the bushes in his yard, swinging a shovel at the roots. He chases the paper boy. Television smashed in the driveway. His wife hides with neighbors. No jobs. He throws his knife in the air. Gives you an idea of the drama in much of his poetry. He was interviewed on the Garrison Keillor show not long ago, within the last 5 years, I think. And Garrison made the point after having Jim read quite a few of his poems, that he says, you're sort of grim, kind of pessimistic. Do you have anything on the lighter side? And Jim said, oh, I use humor, and I write some happy poems sometimes. And he says, well, I hope you write more of them. Well, frankly, I don't know what Jim is writing these last couple of 3 years, particularly since retirement, but I'm eager to find out. So let's welcome Jim Daniels.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you to the Crazy Wisdom Poetry Series. Thanks for having me on. So I'm going to read some poems from my latest book of poems called Gunshy that came out just about a year ago, actually, from Wayne State. And I decided to read some poems I really, I don't think, most of these I've never read before. And so it'll be kind of fun and interesting. So this first poem is called Searchlights. And it's kind of a villanelle. I've been writing, there's 3 or 4 in this book that are villanelle-like, but they don't. The Villanelle police would say that I'm not exactly following the form. And again, this is set in the Detroit area, and some of you have been there know that the former Detroit Lion, Mel Farr, became a big car dealer in the Detroit area. It's Mel Farr Superstar. He did TV commercials for his dealerships. Searchlights. On nights when searchlights crossed the sky, I believed in magic and riches, God and fame, or at least somewhere to go when I died, though the beams only meant a sail at some car lot on 8 Mile or family night at the ball game. Those nights when searchlights crossed the sky with bold swords that made brave stars cry. Some nights in our crack street, I followed their aim until my mother called me in to tell me lies like we're not poor and boys don't cry. Our lights were dim with no cash and lots of blame. My father worked nights while searchlights crossed the sky. When my grandmother fell out of bed, he and I drove to lift her from the floor in her own shame for being a burden, hating my mother, wanting to die. We passed Mel Farr Ford, clear halos of light aimed high, looking like nothing we could ever hope to claim on our way home below searchlights across the sky, leaving us nowhere to go when we died. One of the things I was doing in this book is toggling back and forth between, being my parents' child. My father just turned 94 last week, and being a parent myself. So I'm toggling into being a parent here and to Pittsburgh. So this is called Stuffing the Birds, Carnegie Natural History Museum. Before they started school, we spent a lot of time there because we could walk there. Stuffing the Birds, Carnegie Natural History Museum. I zigzagged a double stroller up the handicap ramp and into the elevator to the 3rd floor where birds posed in permanent peace, forever on the verge of flight. I let the children loose, the waxed tile floor echoing winter boots as they stumbled forward, hooting bird calls from distant planets, arms willfully flapping. Dusty dioramas relegated to a remote corridor, while the floor below us, children lined up to scream at computerized dinosaurs. Time kicked back while my children smudged glass, ignoring names, habitats, migration patterns. My son learned to whistle. My daughter learned to snap her fingers, but the birds stood still. Leaning between vulture and eagle, I envied my children's ability to fill silence with birdsong. My own wings shrugged off long ago. They roamed the rows while I stood in imitation of forced permanence, extinction's camouflage. When they tired, I strapped them back in and pushed home through December slush or January's crisp refusal to acknowledge us. Their flights cannot be measured accurately without carbon dating and love. Our state bird, the ruffed grouse, but we'll never see one in our pigeon city. Nests, abandonment, prey, predator. Back home, I gave them juice boxes and cookies. I read them another fairy tale about forever, about children who flew, who paid no price. And so, thank you. I grew up in a pretty traditional family. My father worked at Ford's. As you can imagine, growing up in the Detroit area, the auto industry was huge. In fact, my older brother just retired from Chrysler, so it's still been a part of my family for generations. And my mother, she had 5 kids, and we kind of had to fight for her attention. And my father was working a lot of overtime back in the glory days of the auto industry, so she was raising us by herself a lot of the time, it seemed. So this is about a time when I had her to myself. It's called My Mother at the Sewing Machine. My mother at the sewing machine hums through drifting motes of dim light dust through basement window wells and the odd magic of us alone together, daytime, weekday. Sick, I shiver with fevered clarity. She is sewing arrows on a scout uniform. She is rustling pinned patterned fabric through the machine for my sister's dress. She is, bobbin spin, needle thread, and a near invisible orange suck of her cigarette while her hands run fabric. She is sewing inches of jeans from one ruined pair onto the blown out knees of another. 4 boys, the jeans must last. My mother at the sewing machine in cold basement light, where I lie on the itchy sponge of an old sofa, watching my deaf grandmother's tiny TV with the sound off, while upstairs she shuffles into idle. My mother stuck between us, threads another needle. In that quiet glow, I could be sick for weeks. I forgot to mention my grandmother lived with us too for many years. One of the things I've sometimes tried to discover, explore is what nature existed on these blocks of identical cement streets. And this is a poem called Legendary Toads. There's an epigraph. Most tadpoles are herbivorous. Some species are omnivores, eating detritus and, whenever available, other tadpoles. Almost all toads of the family, this is some Latin word, have 2 lumps on either side of the back of their head called the parotoid glands. This is the important part. These glands release an alkaloid poison, which oozes out of the toad if stressed or frightened. That was the exciting thing about toads, the poison. The only frogs I've ever met lived as registered guests in Amphibianville at the zoo. My brothers and I found toads in the yard and mauled them with our hands. They spit toad juice on us, toad pee, whatever. We thought it would kill us, so it was briefly thrilling. Frogs lived in ritzier digs, we assumed, though it depends on how you feel about swamps. We assumed anything we lacked came down to money. Except for the poison, the toads seemed almost stoic about our fondling, tossing, happy that we never actually stuck lit fireworks in their mouths. A stream once ran between backyards when our sub was farmland, according to the ancient farmer whose tiny house stunk with dying. Regardless, water pooled there each spring, bred tadpoles we thought were frogs till they punched out limbs to become toads like us. Frogs get all the glory. People spear them at night. What we could have done with spears. We played a game called Kill the Guy with the Ball and multiple variations thereof. We blended in like toads in dirt and high weeds, believing it was our nature. On field trips to Amphibianville, we envied their cool, dark shelter, their tiny signs identifying them by names that we'd never have ourselves. Even now, my hands itch for those toads. You won't find them in textbooks, and only those of us with dirt in our eyes can even spot them in plain sight. So, yeah, the idea of blending in versus standing out is a theme that I think this poem explores a little bit too. So I've always been interested in music. One of the books I worked on a couple years ago with M.L. Liebler, Detroit poet, was Respect, the Poetry of Detroit Music. And it was great fun. And if you're interested in music, particularly the music of Detroit, you might want to check it out. But some of you may remember, given the ages I'm looking at here, Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix died very close to each other. And when I was in high school, so this was a big deal. It's called Between Double Doors, which you had to go through 2 sets of doors to get into the school. We stood inside the main entrance to Fitzgerald High. Janis Joplin died, somebody said. Her too, I said. Hendrix just 2 weeks gone. Too young to have loved either of them. Homeroom, then first period, October, and school already sucked. Why were we stuck sandwiched between doors? I squeezed my lunch bag. No cafeteria for me and my brothers. We'd gone in together on a stereo, allowed in the basement if we kept it down. Keeping things down, not something we did well. Jimmy and Janice weren't that big at our school. I wasn't big myself, thin as a locker at the heart of an elf. Maybe elves have big hearts. Maybe I have to take that back. Somewhere between the hoods and the hippies, I fell through cracks into the DMZ. When was I going to be all of something? I counted on the cracks, stuck between doors while I brought dogs in to sniff our lockers. I didn't know much, but I knew not to keep my stash at school. Jimmy and Janice, the names together almost sang like Jack and Jill up that hill, tumbling down, Jill tumbling after. We had no hills in Detroit, nor bikes without motors. I liked the scream of both of them, guitar, voice, searing burn of my first raging grief when Marlene died that summer, nowhere near 27. Listening to them, I smelled the awful crackle and pop. Basement fire, dryer pilot, gas spill, turn it up, turn it down. Folded notes from a girl flaking into ash behind the garage. I wasn't too young to love drugs. Even my brothers disapproved, one a jock, the other a hood. Janice died. I did not shrug. You can never get back that pure loneliness. I keep looking for a better word, getting lost. The dark center of a car's lighter, surrounded by the searing orange coil. Standing in the middle of nowhere between locked doors, who should I have listened to? What better than to scream? I should have. It wouldn't have killed me. And one of the things I think a lot of us as writers notice is when things start to disappear, and you can drive a long way before you find a phone booth these days. And this was, phone booths were these places where if you were using a phone booth, it was usually something emotional or something important or something dramatic that you had to stop and call from often the middle of nowhere where you happened upon a phone booth. And this was the phone booth that I probably used the most. There was a well, explained it. The poem explains it. Phone booth, 8 Mile and Ryan. Outside Top Hat, a White Castle knockoff, open 24/7. Warm inside, cold out here. 8 lanes of midnight blurring past, slushing into ice. And you with the hunger of habit that can't stomach cheap burgers, stepped on drugs, arbitrary inflation, manufactured shortages, threats not idle. Top Hat, always hiring, greasy exhaust of hamburger, exhaust of idling cars, exhausted resources, exhaustion without drugs, exhausted by the search on 8 Mile, sirens passing towards skids, black ice midnight, loaded salt trucks arriving late. You dial and dial for a lucky number. On the other end, the busy signal of nobody home. In Top Hat windows, a shooting gallery of drunks watching you, watching the siren blur, or just doing the 8 Mile stare, exploring options, making bad coffee last. You wave to no one, your tank on empty, once again and always. The bookends of a phone book dangling empty on a chain, and you keep repeating, I'm good, I'll be good, in lieu of a voice on the other end, your voice chanting a present and future fortune, depending on what God you're praying to in the phone booth at 8 and Ryan, cold hands cupped against air, hissing through bullet holes. And so, I always think that if you contain the poem in a small enough area, you're really forced to get pretty specific. My first real poem I wrote when I was in high school was called Growing Up in a Party Store. It was my first real poem because it was in that store. It was in this box of this small corner store where I was rhyming the names of penny candy with the names of hard liquor because it was a liquor store and it was a party store, right? So now I'm gonna toggle back to my kids. And this kind of plays off the Toad poem in a way, I suppose. It's a poem about my son in the city park across the street from where we used to live. And I guess it's a reminder to me how the imagination of a child can find magic in the mundane, in the everyday. Okay, this is called Fishing in the Cement Pond, Shenley Park, Pittsburgh. Most people don't even know about the pond at the bottom of the deep hollow, reached only by an ancient staircase crumbling down the hillside. We slid down on our asses with our plastic poles and can of worms dug from our yard's packed dirt. My son, 6, the pond enormous in his squint. Under the shadow of the high bridge, among crushed appliances and bald tires, green glass shards and disintegrating cardboard, we sat on the pond's cement lip, man-made and man-ruined. Yet fat wizened catfish, murky shadows of carp wallowed. Flimsy bluegill shimmered with illusion. He wanted to keep his first. It swallowed the hook. I wiggled it out, returned the fish to water, but it floated back toward us through the murk. We could almost see our house above the hillside, but my son was glad we couldn't. We saw a large man on a milk crate fishing as if he cared. My son wanted to row across on a raft of tires or in a fridge with the door removed. Above us, the city passed another hot and endless August day. Traffic from the freeway hissed through trees. Our dead fish shone flat in the sun. The blind fisherman flinched at our casting. He asked my son to tell him what he saw and was told a tale of gigantic proportions. The man cocked his head and laughed. I do believe I hear the waves, he said. The cement pond, giant seashell or rusted car, magnified all sound. We ran out of worms or the fish stopped biting. A thin line of sweat glistened on my son's upper lip. He'd caught his first fish and talked to a blind man. The city waited above us with red signs and yellow lines. Can we get lost on the way home? He asked. You need a map for that, I said. We struggled up the broken steps. How did that man get down there? He asked. The sea was vast and unknowable. This will be another parental poem, I suppose. It's kind of toggles back and forth a little bit between childhood and being an adult. It's called the Music of the Light Timer. Still light, steady in the dark, silent house. My daughter played piano for 5 years, then stopped. My son learned to blow one clear note on the saxophone, then stopped. Its black case sat mocking till we gave it to our friend's son, who also abandoned it. He had ambitions, the other boy, of becoming a pro wrestler. My son wanted to be a professional lip syncer. My daughter wanted to be a ballerina vampire princess, and one Halloween she was. Me, I mostly wanted to get stoned and mostly did until I stopped and stopped and stopped again. If we graphed our failures, if we broke our crayons and went on strike, if we danced in somebody's perpetually dim basement, then what? I left home for the last time at 25 after detoxing. I helped my mother decorate the Christmas tree, both of us framed in firm, steady light through the front window of our dulled house on the sharp edge of Detroit. Tonight, the still steady house in Pittsburgh's dark light, my children charting high on their separate angular paths away from me, well above my jagged spikes. Winter, I keep adding layers against the cold. The other boy drowned last year, and our friends continue to drown this year. My children are not coming home. Yes, silence, the instrument I am learning to play at last. And thanks. And so I'm going to jump in. And well, first of all, so Ed mentioned that I write fiction. In my most recent book of fiction, it's called the Perp Walk. I alternate, traditional stories with what could be called prose poems or flash fiction. I never understand the difference, but I thought I'd read one of those because I think it might sort of fit in with other things that I'm reading. I've been really interested actually in physical landscape and geography. So some of you probably know that Detroit, well, southeastern lower Michigan in general is pretty flat, but Detroit is very flat, very few hills. So it's very easy to lay the roads out in a grid pattern. So, Ed mentioned my first book, Places Everyone. Well, the cover image is of a grid pattern. And I've used that grid pattern on the covers of some other books too, because it's the idea of having these blocks, identical blocks, and trying to think about, how do you establish your individuality in those identical houses, in those identical cars, working in the same places. That sort of challenges to say, hey, I'm here too. So this poem is called Circling Squares, circling those blocks. Brick box houses, boom, one and another, car clunk over concrete rectangles of street divided by tar spacers, trip over cracked sidewalk squares lined with weeds to the front door, boom, slabs, no dreaming here, baby, no hidden jewels, just red brick, orange, blank dominoes not falling, already played, four walls, boom, street not plowed nor salted, not in the budget, Snow rutted by bald tires, ice crust, bumper hitch for kicks. Detroit and Warren sideswiping each other daily on 8 Mile Road. Boom. Cost of doing business. Boot hockey. Broken nose, fat lip, black eye, red slush. Street names. Signs of love to keep bodies warm. Marked territory. Boom. Stop. Too late. Nostalgia for blood. Boom. Drive slow. Nobody behind you. Lost yet? No. Yes. No payoff in breaking in. We're the ones breaking in, further from the city. Bigger houses, bigger yards, more cover, more doors, windows, more stuff. Blood for its own sake. Size of affection, signs of infection. No vote for signs, no for sale signs. For sale size. What they asking? 50s tract housing. Stuck zipper of the assembly line. Boom, kids, boom, boom, boom. Who's giving in? Up, against signs, cruising for a bruising. Will the old names drift off in bitter wind, ripped from identical mailboxes? Nobody changing up, houses crammed onto cloned lots. Boom, tour guide, engine, caboose, cranky crossing guard with a heart of bile. Hi, 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 bye, 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 bye. You got a vein like that? Insider on the outside. Roll down the window, the old curses swarm, old names flattened into a litany of slabs, rectangles and squares, rotary dialed phone numbers of the dead, graffiti prayer. We used to, we don't anymore. We roam streets, copying house numbers on the torn sheets of loose leaf. Our streets, for comfort, boom, nothing to loosen, nothing to lose. Cement streets crack, crumble, not in the budget. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya. But I am ya. Boom. Why stop? Why yield? Why idle? New dogs tricked with the same bark sniff each other's butts at the fence line. Boom. No bite. The butts of all our jokes forever. And so I'm going to read a few newer poems to finish up here. This one's called The Basketball Pushed Down. And it's very simple in terms of thinking about dribbling a basketball, but I'm trying to hopefully get at something else too. The basketball pushed down pops back up off cement. Everybody hears that, but listen to the graze against your fingers, a wish of sandpaper fine-grained, a shift between sheets, somebody slipping out of bed to return or not. The ball returns to the hand, connected to the arm, shoulder muscles, neck, and to the brain, the world in your palm and not. Somebody looking to steal that ball, but you have it now. Whap, whap, whap. Somebody waiting for you to make a move. Take a shot, juke and fake and go the other way. Here's your friend. Outside on asphalt, a little cracked. Whap, whap. Breath and heartbeat, ball and hand, time and time. Caress and caress. The ball is your friend, filled with religious air and mystery. You interpret scriptures, somebody wanting to mock your belief. Go the other way with it. The ball, the flesh of it, and the faith of it, and you too, in the air between hard and soft, the whap and the whisper. I'll just leave you there, top of the key, before you make a move or shoot. You've got ball, my friend. Maybe you didn't know it now, but there is no better place. I know I can't tell you nothing, but I'm telling you, whap, whap, whap. Take your time. And I wanted to read another music poem. And some of you are maybe very familiar with the song Land of 1,000 Dances. And I was always really interested in 1,000 dances. So I was inspired to write this as a little epigraph, sort of explaining a little bit about the song in case you're not familiar with it. Land of 1,000 Dances. In the original recording by Chris Kenner, 16 dances are specifically mentioned. The pony, the chicken, the mashed potato, the alligator, the Watusi, the twist, the fly, the jerk, the tango, the yo-yo, the sweet pea, the hand eye, the slap, the bop, the fish, and the Popeye. I cannot name 1,000, though 1,000 surely exist, named or not. Take sex, for example, and the 64 generally accepted numbers of Kama Sutra positions. My least favorite is waiting for a phone call. Out of 9 positions, I often get stuck in right field. It's a position until motion spins it into something to name. When you take a position on an issue, dancing stops. In conclusion, I vow to love you until all dances have been named. In conclusion, in the land of 1,000 dances, no borders exist, or passports, or trophies, or medals, or weapons, or gloves, or earmuffs, or sweatbands, or in conclusion, when you and I dance or have sex, or dance and have sex, the moon blots out every period at the end of every sentence. Na, 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 na. Sometimes I feel like I should just end every poem with "there's na na na." So one of the things that happened, actually, we all know COVID's just messed with our whole sense of time and when things happen. But my mother died on Leap Day, which is February 29th, 2020. And basically a week later, we were locked down. So that's how I kind of date it. So this is kind of about, I mean, the whole notion of seeing somebody for the last time and wanting to sort of have this moment. And my mother was pretty far gone at the time, so we didn't have that moment. She's trying to eat in this poem, like a week before she died, or maybe 2 weeks. Strawberry, it's called. The final time I saw my mother, she was trying to find the last strawberry on her plate. She was blind. I walked up behind her and kissed the top of her head and said, "I love you." She reached up a sticky hand and brushed away where I kissed, then lowered it again into the juicy bowl. I was going to say we never know which strawberry will be our last, but I think she knew. Damn slippery thing. Just a couple more here. This is called Designated Driver. So, you know, I don't drink or do drugs or anything like that, and I haven't for quite a while. But in various families, you can get identified as having a certain role because of that. So this is called Designated Driver. One of the few poems where I talk about writing in a poem. I try not to do that, but it kind of seems important to this poem and the kind of self-evaluation we do when we sit down and write. Designated Driver. I was working on some writing when my nephew called to ask my advice on whether he could try smoking pot again. He's taking a poll. His therapist, his AA sponsor, and various members of the Brotherhood, and I am the family source on fire extinguishers, so I'm mumbling and stumbling, improvising poorly through the rapids on the stream, since I have considered smoking pot again myself while taking a similar menu of drugs for anxiety and depression that kind of work, but not quite really. And outside, the wind is shaking the big tree across the street into a wobbly mess, despite its deep roots. And if we keep talking, he might convince me to light one up myself. And I'm checking the weather here in Pittsburgh and back in Detroit, and it's 84 here, but feels like 86, and 85 there and feels like 84. So we're almost in sync, though I don't like the looks of that thundercloud icon. And we've talked for almost an hour until falling into the silence of my nervous laugh. And it's like that when you're alone and been there and done that. And it wouldn't take much to stumble into the weeds and get lost in the drug of being lost again, and the soothing wind through trees blocking all sky. And he tells me his kids were putting on a play about their parents. And in one part, they're supposed to laugh like their father does, but they don't know what their father's laugh sounds like. And my daughter once said while we were sledding that she wished I used my sledding laugh more. Oh, the storm is on its way every day, blowing us off the high wire, and we catch it with our hands on our way down or not. But either way, we tire and fall with a smile on our face or not. So I hang up ashamed of not knowing what to say as an expert on shame. So I do tell him I love him, which is a little joke between us. And I hear half a laugh, but I am half his godfather, so maybe that works out. And it's not like he's taking a vote on whether he should try getting high to chill him out while he's still not drinking, though he kind of is. And I'm still talking to myself about the weather while he steps back into a small house to his wife and 3 kids. And I forgot what I was revising, or maybe I deleted everything except my life, my imperfect life. Feels like, but it's really. Okay, and I will. I guess I'll finish up with this one. Yeah, this is a called On the Edge of Detroit. So it's kind of circles back to some of the earlier things. And one of the things I was trying to do here again was focusing on the landscape and the idea of somehow rising above it, or thinking about rising above it. So you'll see a couple things from some of the other poems filter back in here. Some of my obsessions. On the edge of Detroit, in the woods behind Schofield Elementary, skipped over by levelers and pavers, bulldozing through to the further away, we built nests in the swampy lowlands, the only hiding place for miles. Lush fluorescent algae stink, elusive tadpoles and toads and frogs and rabbits and leaf rustle and boy tussle over the biggest sticks, the heaviest stones. Old trees tall enough to drop dead out of, rampant sprawl of weeds, cattails, stray dogs, rumors of deer, and birds that were not sparrows. Our streets ran straight, new and treeless yet. Our houses stamped out like auto parts our fathers made. Count mattered, not craft. The fetid water could not carry us to further away, but we could sink there, muck oozing up in evidence of trespass we could not wash away. What fear we could muster, we invested in that small square of trees. Our first bank accounts of spare change and squalor. Beside the school, factories of our fathers squared off, surrounded by the smoking guns of parking lots, waiting for us with their metallic jungle of the terrible promise of security. When we brought pollywogs home in glass jars, they died quickly into the limp punctuation of our futures. We threw mud and cattails at each other in random battles, learning the company message of turning on each other. Our mothers washed us off with hoses and sent us to our rooms. We did our first things in those woods, in that swamp, until they called it a city park, cut down trees, drained water, erected swings, and a globe you could climb. Even a tennis court that quickly earthquaked into cracks, and a fence that shrugged into rust, keeping us out for protecting us from that dull game exposed to summer sun. Holes in the nets too big to catch anything. I climbed that globe to be atop that tamed world, unable to resist its pure, perfect roundness above all the leveling. We searched in vain for the rumored rough beasts. All right, thank you.